He thought he'd logged off, but his microphone was still on. As hundreds of stunned employees listened in, Keanu Reeves unknowingly revealed a secret plan that would shake the entire industry. What they heard wasn't meant for anyone's ears, so why did it feel like it was meant for them all along? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was just after 10:00 a.m. Pacific time when the digital meeting room started filling up. From small editing bays in Burbank to location trailers in New Mexico. From janitorial break rooms in Atlanta to green rooms in London. Nearly 600 names lit up the screen of Green Horizon Studios' internal town hall. Most employees didn't know why the meeting had been scheduled so suddenly. All they'd received was a simple calendar invite titled Sustainability and the Future of Film, marked mandatory for all departments. There was quiet buzz, people whispered over headsets and typed into side chats. Grips and set painters sipped their coffee while adjusting earbuds. Costume assistants tried to finish stitching while staying logged in. Even the custodial team was granted time off to join from studio lounges. It was unusual, and that alone kept people alert. The host camera finally went live. A polished woman with warm eyes and a steel-like presence introduced herself. Claire Mendez, Director of Global Production Ethics. She welcomed everyone to what she described as a groundbreaking company initiative on sustainable filmmaking. "We believe storytelling and responsibility must go hand in hand," she said with conviction. "And to help us reimagine the soul of this industry, we've invited someone who truly understands both craft and conscience." That's when the screen changed. There he was. Keanu Reeves appeared in front of a sunlit bookshelf, calm as ever, wearing a simple dark t-shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His face held no vanity, just a quiet presence. The reaction across the virtual room was immediate. In dozens of microseconds, eyebrows lifted, jaws dropped, and side chats lit up. No one had expected Keanu. He didn't begin with anything flashy, no quotes, no fanfare, just a gentle smile and a greeting that felt like it was meant for each individual person. "Thank you for letting me join today," he began. "This isn't just about carbon footprints and energy grids. It's about people. It's about the world we leave behind, not just in our stories, but in our real lives." He spoke slowly, deliberately, with the kind of humility that made everyone lean in. Keanu explained why he'd partnered with Green Horizon on their next eco-conscious production. He talked about film sets powered by solar rigs, props made from recycled materials, and supply chains that considered not just efficiency but ethics. But his speech wasn't technical. It was personal. "I've stood on hundreds of sets," he said, eyes focused, "and I've watched what people give. Their time, their sleep, sometimes their health. I've seen crew members push through storms, illness, and impossible schedules just to make the shot happen. And I've asked myself, what kind of legacy are we leaving for them?" There was a stillness in the virtual room. No one dared to look away from their screen. It wasn't just what Keanu said. It was how he said it. Like he meant every word with the weight of experience. Like he'd been carrying these thoughts for a long time and finally had the space to speak them aloud. He shifted in his seat, glancing down for a brief moment, then looked up again with quiet intensity. "I've worked with incredible directors," he said, "but the people who've saved my life on set? It's the riggers, the medics, the drivers who show up at 4 in the morning, the people whose names you never see in the press. Those are the heroes too." Faces across the call began to soften. Some viewers leaned closer. Others sat frozen, unsure how to respond to such unfiltered honesty. Keanu continued, "If we want to make sustainable movies, we have to start with sustainable lives. That means treating every member of the crew like they matter. Because they do. And I've seen too many of them burn out, break down, or quietly disappear. and we pretend like it's just part of the job. But it shouldn't be. For a few seconds, no one said a thing. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "We can do better?" He sat back slightly, as if letting the weight of the statement settle into the space between him and his unseen audience. And it did. In makeup trailers, equipment lockers, and conference rooms across 5 countries, people felt the words land. Claire Mendez returned briefly to the screen, thanking Keanu for his heartfelt contribution. "That," she said with emotion in her voice, "is why we asked Keanu to speak today, because it's not just about practices, it's about principles." She opened the floor for a brief Q&A, but Keanu politely declined, saying he wanted to let the team move forward with the presentations. His last words to the group were simple and gentle. "Thank you for what you do, every day, even when no one's watching." Then his camera turned off. His square in the grid disappeared. And just like that, the legendary guest was gone. Or so it seemed. The moderator began introducing the next panelist, a senior sustainability consultant ready to dive into carbon offset strategies. But within seconds, something strange began to happen. A faint sound carried over the audio. Shuffling papers. A sigh. A distant voice. It didn't belong to the new speaker. Then came the unmistakable sound of Keanu's voice again. But this time, it wasn't formal. It wasn't planned. "Hey, Jake," he said in a relaxed tone. "Man, that talk got me thinking again." Confused glances flashed across video feeds. The host stopped mid-sentence. The chat box blinked with messages. Was Keanu still on? Keanu's camera stayed off, but his voice was clearly still transmitting. A few participants chuckled nervously, assuming it would be muted in a moment. But the audio continued, unfiltered and startlingly personal. "I'm telling you, man," Keanu said, unaware hundreds were still on the line. "Every time I do one of these, I walk away feeling like I didn't say enough, like I still owe people more." The moderator's eyes darted across her screen. Claire looked off camera, whispering to her tech assistant. Several backstage staff scrambled into action. They tried sending private messages, switching back-end controls, but nothing worked. Keanu's mic was still open. "I saw their faces, Jake," Keanu continued. "They looked tired, and not just from today. I mean tired like tired of not being seen." A stunned silence fell over the call. Employees from all corners of the company stared at their screens, unsure what to do. Should they log off? Should they stay? Then came the shift. "I've been thinking," Keanu said slowly. "What if we actually did something? Not a press release, not a donation drive, something real, for the crew, for the people who don't have agents fighting for them." His voice was raw, thoughtful, not performative. He wasn't speaking like a celebrity. He was speaking like someone reckoning with the truth of what he'd seen over decades in the industry. In the chat box, someone typed, "Is this real?" Another added, "Should we be hearing this?" But no one left the call. Keanu's voice carried again. "I don't care if it's not flashy. I want them to know they matter, that we saw them and we never forgot." By now, hearts were pounding. Some staff sat frozen, caught between awe and discomfort. Others began to feel something else. Validation, recognition, a deep, stirring sense of being seen for the first time. Keanu sighed. "I've been holding this in for too long." And then the sound of him shifting in his chair. A deep breath. His voice again. "You think I'm crazy, Jake? Maybe I am. But I'm done waiting for studios to lead. I want to lead something different." Just as Claire prepared to speak, the screen flickered. Her team managed to disconnect his camera feed entirely, but still, the audio rolled on. A quiet chill moved through the virtual space. The meeting meant to showcase corporate progress had just become something else entirely. Unintended, unfiltered, unforgettable. And no one knew yet that they were about to hear something that would change their lives forever. Chloe Hammond had managed hundreds of online conferences before. As the lead IT manager for Green Horizon Studios' virtual events, she knew how to anticipate hiccups. Frozen screens, echo loops, wrong speaker settings. She'd seen it all. But as she scanned the activity dashboard on her second monitor, something didn't feel right. Keanu's video feed had ended cleanly, just like the system log confirmed. But the audio indicators beside his name were still lighting up. She squinted. "Wait a second," she muttered under her breath. She tapped her colleague on the shoulder. "Devin, the backup engineer monitoring the secondary feed. Do you see this?" she asked, pointing at Keanu's audio status. "He's marked as disconnected, but the audio's still transmitting." Devin leaned in, frowning. "That's not possible." But it was. They clicked into the admin panel and watched the stream. The waveform was still pulsing. Then came the voice. Quiet at first, but unmistakable. "Hey Jake, you wouldn't believe how nervous I was just now," Keanu said, laughing softly. "I haven't felt that in a while." The two IT techs looked at each other. Devin's fingers flew across the keyboard. "It's not a feedback loop. That's him live." Chloe's stomach dropped. She quickly messaged the moderator, Claire, on the internal chat. "Keanu's mic is still hot. Trying to mute manually, stand by." On the other end of the call, Claire read the message mid-sentence and went pale. She nodded slightly at the camera but didn't say a word about it publicly. She was mid-introduction for the next sustainability speaker. She couldn't disrupt the flow, but the sound of Keanu's casual conversation was already bleeding into the call. On the main feed, hundreds of attendees were starting to pick it up too. "I mean, it went well, right?" Keanu said, his voice low and honest. I wanted to say more, but I didn't want to make it about me. At first, people assumed it was part of a post-event segment, maybe a behind-the-scenes thing. But there was no label, no camera feed, just that voice, raw and personal. Then Jake's voice came through faintly on the other end. "Dude, you're always too hard on yourself. It landed. I watched the whole thing. You crushed it." Keanu laughed. "I guess. I don't know, man. I see those crew faces and I feel like we're all missing something. Like we're not doing enough for them." The chat feed exploded. "Wait, is this real? Is this part of the show? Are we supposed to be hearing this?" No one left. Some minimized the chat. Others took screenshots. A few started recording. But most just stared at their screens, realizing slowly that something deeply human was unfolding. And it wasn't planned. Chloe typed commands into the admin panel at lightning speed, but every attempt to mute Keanu's feed returned the same message. Request failed. Connection persists. It didn't make sense. The system wasn't malfunctioning anywhere else. Every other participant could mute, unmute, enter, or leave normally. Only Keanu's audio seemed to be stuck in place, still transmitting with perfect clarity. "Try cutting the stream from the server side," Chloe whispered. Devin did. Nothing changed. On the main call, Keanu's voice rolled on, calm and unaware. "You know what I hate?" he said. "I hate that the people who make the magic happen rarely ever hear thank you. I mean a real thank you. Not a line in the credits or a tweet from a studio head. I mean the kind that you look someone in the eye and say, 'I couldn't have done this without you.'" Claire's voice broke slightly as she tried to keep the meeting on track. "We'll now hear from Dr. Patel on circular economy principles in set design." But no one was listening. Not really. Their attention stayed glued to the unintended audio. It was like a curtain had been pulled back on something sacred, a moment they were never supposed to hear, but somehow needed to. "I saw a guy last year," Keanu said. "Sound crew. Had been working 16 hours straight. Didn't complain, just kept going. After wrap, I saw him sit on the curb alone and eat dinner out of a plastic container. Everyone else had gone. I sat with him for a bit. We didn't talk much. But it stuck with me." The moderator's voice faded completely from memory. In a production office in Toronto, A lighting technician named Camille froze at her desk, tears welling up. She remembered nights just like the one he described, eating cold leftovers under the rig while everyone else celebrated a successful shoot. At a studio lot in Georgia, a janitor named Dennis sat up straighter. He had only taken this mandatory call out of obligation. Now, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't acting. It wasn't polished. It was the real voice of a man who had been paying attention all along. "I don't want to be another guy who gave speeches but didn't change anything," Keanu continued, his tone heavier now. "We talk about legacy. What about the people who built the sets, who stayed up all night fixing broken lights, who caught me mid-fall during a stunt and didn't even get thanked in the wrap party?" The chat exploded again. "This is real. He's serious. Why am I crying at work?" And at that moment, what had started as a technical glitch began to feel like something else entirely. Not a mistake, but a rare window into truth. Jake's voice returned, lower this time. "You've always been different, man. But this sounds like something you've been carrying for years." Keanu let out a long breath. "Yeah, maybe I have." In the silence that followed, the virtual room filled with something deeper than noise. It was the collective stillness of hundreds of people listening. Really listening, not because they had to, but because they couldn't turn away. "I remember one time on a shoot in Oregon," Keanu said. "We were behind schedule, tensions were high. A grip named Marco slipped on a rain-slick platform. No one noticed but me. He could have been seriously hurt. I helped him up, asked if he was okay. He smiled, wiped his hand, and just said, 'Thanks for seeing me, Mr. Reeves.'" He paused, his voice cracked slightly. I never forgot that, not the fall, not the thank you, but the way he said it, like he didn't expect anyone to notice him. More messages flooded the chat. "This is the most real thing I've ever heard in this job. I feel seen. Helped us describe my entire career." Back in the IT control room, Chloe sat still, her hands off the keyboard now. She had stopped trying to fix the glitch. Something in her gut told her, this wasn't meant to be fixed yet. Keanu's voice softened even further. "I don't want to keep waiting for studios to change. I want to do something myself, something direct, something now." Jake asked, "Like what?" Keanu answered without hesitation. "A fund. For the crew. No red tape. No PR stunts. Just help. When and where it's needed. Tuition, medical bills, rent, breaks when they've been pushed too far. You know, stuff that changes lives." The chat fell silent. This wasn't a speech. It wasn't a campaign. It was one man, in the quiet of his own space, speaking like no one was listening. Except everyone was. And what he was saying wasn't just powerful. It was personal. Keanu leaned back. The creak of his chair echoed faintly through the line. "I've seen too many people fade into the background. They deserve to be in the light for once, even if it's just for a moment." In a backlot lounge in Vancouver, a young production assistant named Olivia wiped her eyes. She had been thinking of quitting. The hours, the pressure, the lack of recognition. It had worn her down, but something about hearing this shifted something. And then it happened. Jake said, "Man, if people could hear this, they'd probably cry." Keanu chuckled. "Let's hope they never do." But they already were. The audio feed continued, and Keanu's voice dropped into a more reflective place. His tone was no longer just casual, it was intimate. The kind of voice you use when you're not performing for anyone, just speaking from the center of something that's been building inside for too long. "I keep thinking about this one guy," he said. "Miguel, set builder on that indie project we shot upstate. He used to sleep in the van we used for hauling lumber. I didn't know until the last week. He was living in it. Still showed up before everyone, never complained. Built the rain tower for the climax scene with his own hands." There was a pause, a breath. Studios made millions off that film. Miguel barely made enough to get his truck fixed. In a quiet office in New York, a former assistant camera operator named Joel clenched his jaw. He had worked with Miguel once, had lost track of him over the years, and now here was Keanu, remembering him, not just vaguely, but clearly, by name, with detail. Jake asked gently, "You've been carrying this stuff for a while, huh?" Keanu responded, "Yeah, I see them. The ones who do everything and get nothing. You know how many crew members I've seen eating fast food out of their laps while sitting on a coil of cable in the cold? No chairs, no trailers, just forgotten." Another silence. Pungent, then softly, I hate that word, background, as if these people are part of the scenery. They're the ones making it all real. In hundreds of homes, offices, and trailers, those listening began to feel something they didn't expect. Tears. Not because of some dramatic announcement or moving film clip, but because someone had finally said what they'd been feeling for years. "We talk about stars and directors," Keanu said slowly, "but it's the grip who rigs in the rain, the cleaner who picks up after us, the gaffer who tapes cables while we get makeup retouches. That's who makes the real magic happen." A makeup artist named Dana sat frozen in her apartment, her brush mid-stroke on a mannequin head, her eyes filled. She'd worked 3 shows with Keanu. She never thought he'd even remembered her name. But now, hearing this, she believed he probably did. "Remember Sandy from Wardrobe?" Keanu continued, smiling slightly. "She used to sneak extra hot packs into people's coats on night shoots. Always said she just wanted people to feel warm, even when the scene didn't call for it." Jake chuckled. "She was the best." "She still is," Keanu said. "She's working on a set downtown right now. I saw her last week. She said her back's been acting up. No one offered to get her a better chair." The people listening to Keanu's voice weren't just hearing stories. They were feeling remembered. In real time, dozens of them began to realize that they were not invisible after all. Some of them had been on those same sets. Some had worked beside the very people Keanu named. Some had been those people. "I remember Malik," Keanu said, his voice lowering. "He was a utility tech on that sci-fi project in Atlanta. Worked nights, weekends, overtime. Never once missed a shift. One day I saw him nodding off in the corner near the generator. He hadn't gone home in 3 days. When I asked if he was okay, you know what he said? 'I'm good. I've got bills, man. Gotta keep moving.' And then he smiled, like he didn't want to be a burden." Jake didn't answer this time. He didn't need to. In a trailer near Burbank, a young woman named Patrice listened from her cot between scenes. She worked props on a streaming show. Low pay, long hours. Malik was her cousin. He passed away the year after that project wrapped, heart failure brought on by stress. No one ever mentioned him in the rap party or the studio blog, but Keanu just had. "I've been thinking about putting together something for years," Keanu continued, more to himself than to Jake. "A way to say thank you, not with words, but with something real. I just didn't know how." The chat box in the virtual town hall had long gone silent. Not because people stopped paying attention, but because they were too moved to type. "I keep these little journals," Keanu said. "I write down the names of people who go unthanked. Not the leads, not the directors, but the people who hold everything together." A pause. Marco. "Sandy. Malik. Gloria. Luis from transportation. Raymond from security at Lot D. He used to keep gum in his vest and hand it out to nervous PAs. Said it helped them stay calm when the call sheets ran long." Blur at that name. Raymond, watching from a small desk in a security outpost, stood up. His eyes widened. He covered his mouth. He hadn't seen Keanu in years. Thought he'd been forgotten. But there it was. His name, his kindness. Spoken aloud, and not by a manager, not by HR, but by Keanu Reeves. "I guess what I'm trying to say, Jake, Keanu said with a breath, is that I'm tired of pretending like appreciation has to be earned through titles or screen time. These people earn it every single day, just by showing up, just by giving all they have. In a sound mixing bay, a senior engineer named Gloria closed her laptop lid and leaned her head into her hands. She had just heard her name. Keanu let out a quiet breath. It lingered in the microphone, that small human exhale, saying more than words could. There's this belief in Hollywood, he said softly, that the only people worth celebrating are the ones in front of the camera. But that's never felt right to me. The people who keep the wheels turning, who carry the weight, we rarely even look them in the eye. Across the virtual conference, people were now sitting with hands over their mouths, their eyes brimming, the kind of emotion that arrives uninvited and unstoppable. I don't think we should wait until someone retires to say, "You mattered," Keanu continued. I think we should say it now, before they burn out, before they walk away wondering if it ever made a difference. At that moment, the audio flickered briefly but held steady. The glitch that kept Keanu's microphone open remained untouched by every system command Chloe and her IT team had tried. But no one was working to stop it anymore. They had all gone still. We're so used to thinking, someone else will fix it, Keanu said, that studios will step up or the unions will negotiate something better. But while we wait, people keep giving more than they can afford to lose. Jake's voice came in, quiet and careful. So, what do you want to do? Keanu didn't hesitate. I want to give back, not because it's expected, not because it's strategic, but because I'm finally ready to do something that means more than just saying thank you. There was a silence, followed by a brief sound of Keanu getting up. His chair creaked slightly and returning with something in his hands. I found this photo the other day, he said. It's from the wrap of a film we shot in Prague. It's me and 36 crew members, all standing in the rain, soaked but smiling. I'm the only one who made it to the DVD cover, but every one of them made that film happen. He paused, then added with quiet force, I've carried that with me ever since. In Los Angeles, a boom operator named Raj leaned against the studio wall and closed his eyes. He had been on that Prague set. He wasn't in the picture, but he had held the boom for 12 hours that day, arms shaking, body cold. And now he heard Keanu speaking as if none of that had gone unnoticed. The audio continued as Keanu sat back down. I think the real measure of success isn't how much attention you get. It's how many people you lift without needing to be seen doing it. That was the last thing he said before the feed dipped into silence. But the impact was already done. The walls that usually separated stars from staff had crumbled. What remained was something rare, something beautiful, a glimpse into a soul. In the control room of Green Horizon Studios' Digital Operations Center, Chloe Hammond stared at her screen like she was watching something impossible. The audio feed from Keanu Reeves continued to pulse steadily, line after line of waveforms rolling across the dashboard as his voice filled the still center broadcast. It's been 23 minutes, Devon said, glancing at the system clock. He's still broadcasting. We've tried disconnecting his session from the server, rerouting the signal, disabling his permissions. Nothing's working, Chloe muttered. It's like the software's ignoring us. The call wasn't crashing, it wasn't malfunctioning. Every other participant's camera and mic were functioning normally. Claire, the moderator, had even switched to a pre-recorded sustainability panel to fill the gap. Yet Keanu's voice quietly continued in the background. Faint, but unmistakable. I've seen people give their lives to this business and get forgotten, he said. It's not just unfair, it's cruel. Chloe hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. They had one option left. Cut the entire conference feed. End the event. Boot every participant. But the moment her hand moved, she paused. I don't think we should shut it down, she whispered. Devon looked at her. Why not? Chloe's eyes were locked on the chat feed, still flowing, Dozens of people were writing in real time. Comments ranged from stunned silence to emotional gratitude. "This isn't a mistake anymore," Chloe said. "They need to hear this." Meanwhile, Keanu's voice drifted through again, steady and more resolved now. "I've been thinking about how to make it count," he told Jake. "Not just another charity gala, not a check with a camera flash. I want to do something that says, 'You're seen. You matter.'" That's it. The sincerity in his tone was overwhelming. He wasn't pacing through an idea for press. He was working through a moral commitment. "I don't want this to be about me," Keanu added. "That's what always stops me. People think it's ego or a brand thing, but it's not. I just want them to know they're not invisible." Devin leaned forward. "You think he knows he's still live?" Chloe shook her head. "No, but maybe it doesn't matter." She glanced at the stream stats. Still over 500 participants connected. Not one had logged off. From interns to senior producers, grips to costume designers, every screen remained. And Keanu was still speaking, not to them directly, but into a space that was now larger than he knew. "I've seen crew members collapse after 14-hour days and still come back smiling the next morning," he said. "And I think we've mistaken resilience for lack of pain. That needs to change." Jake's voice came through gently. "You've talked about this for a while now, but this is different. You sound like you're ready." "I am," Keanu said. "I've spent years watching people give everything to a project, then leave with nothing more than a signed t-shirt and a line on a resume. That's not right. We have the means to do better. We just don't have the habit." Jake let the silence stretch before asking, "So what are you thinking? A foundation?" Keanu was quiet for a moment, as if turning something over in his mind. "Not a foundation," he finally said. "Foundations take too long, too much paperwork, too many hoops. This has to be immediate, personal, direct." In the control room, Chloe pulled up the back-end admin logs again, still baffled. The system claimed the audio channel was inactive, yet the stream remained live and crystal clear. Her fingers hovered over the final override command, the one that would hard stop all outgoing feeds. But she didn't press it. Instead, she opened the participant dashboard. Still over 500 viewers. Still not one person had left. The chat, though slower now, had shifted in tone. It wasn't shock anymore. It was reverence. He's saying what we've all felt for years. Don't cut the feed. This is the first time I've felt seen in this industry. Back on the audio stream, Keanu continued. "I don't want another project named after me. I don't want a plaque or an award. I want to take a portion of what I've earned, what this business has given me, and put it back into the people who never get asked how they're doing." He paused, and the sound of him shifting in his chair was followed by a low exhale, steady and thoughtful. "Not just the camera operators and first assistants," he added, "but the caterers, the janitors, the overnight security, the guy who wraps cable in the freezing rain at 2 a.m. and then drives home in silence." Jake's voice was soft. "You mean like a direct relief system?" "Exactly," Keanu replied. "No filters, no PR team, just help. When it's needed most. Someone's daughter needs tuition, help. Someone's knee gives out after rigging for 20 years, help. No questions, just trust, because they've earned it already." In a cramped production office in New Orleans, a wardrobe assistant named Myra wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. She'd been injured on a job a year ago and never fully recovered. The union paperwork was slow. The studio's acknowledgement had been non-existent. Now, hearing this stranger, this star, speak like he'd seen her life from the inside, it undid her. "I want to call it something real," Keanu continued. "Something that means guidance and light. Something like the lighthouse." Jake's voice lit up. "That's good." "The Lighthouse Fund," Keanu repeated. "For the people who keep the ship afloat, the people in the storm, the ones who never ask to be noticed." Or in the chat window, someone wrote it first. The Lighthouse Fund. Then another echoed it, and another. A movement had begun, and the man at the center of it still didn't know anyone was listening. Keanu's voice remained steady, but there was something new behind it now. A quiet intensity, a sense of direction, of purpose finally finding form. "I don't want to wait for permission," he said. "I've already spoken to my accountant. I've got the structure ready, the seed money set aside. The lighthouse can be real. Tomorrow, if we want it to be." Jake let out a low whistle. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Keanu replied. "We're all standing on the shoulders of people who are barely standing anymore. It's time we hold them up for once." Chloe watched the chat fill with silent emojis. Hearts, hands raised, lighthouse icons now flooding the feed. Her eyes misted. She wasn't a grip or a gaffer. She was an IT engineer. But somehow, she felt like he was speaking to her too. Keanu went on, unaware. "I've made mistakes. I've missed moments, times I should have said something and didn't. But maybe this can be a way to make it right. Even a little." Jake said, "You've already done more than most." Keanu paused. "It's not enough." There was movement behind him. Perhaps the sound of a pen scratching on paper or a drawer closing, then a softer tone, almost like a vow. "I don't need applause, I don't need headlines. I just need them to know someone out there remembers. That when they worked through injury, through grief, through rain and heat and long nights, it mattered." The virtual room was completely silent. Hundreds of screens, hundreds of listeners, motionless. In a dressing room in Los Angeles, a hairstylist named Leo leaned against the mirror, tears rolling down his cheeks. He'd never been thanked at an award show, never received a bonus or a public mention. But this felt like a thank you, meant just for him. "I don't know what this will look like yet," Keanu said, "but it's coming. The lighthouse is real, even if it starts with one person, one story, one moment of help." Jake whispered, "They'll never see it coming." Keanu smiled faintly. "That's the point." Chloe finally lowered her hands from the keyboard. "I'm not stopping it," she said to Devon, voice low but certain. "Not yet." Keanu leaned back, his chair creaking gently. "Some things are supposed to stay hidden," he said, "but not gratitude. Not this." The audio continued. The chat stayed alive. The lighthouse was no longer just an idea. And though Keanu didn't know it yet, his unguarded voice had just lit a beacon that hundreds of tired souls had been waiting their entire careers to see. In a modest studio in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a young lighting assistant named Mason was finishing his third energy drink of the morning when he heard it. Keanu's voice. "Still on the call? Still transmitting?" Mason froze, unsure if it was a glitch or some kind of playback. But the voice wasn't repeating, it was speaking new words. Clear, heartfelt, unrehearsed. "Remember that night shoot in the canyon?" Keanu said. "Freezing cold, 3 a.m. One of the actors had a breakdown. They couldn't stop crying. You know who got him through it? Not the director, not the producer. The boom operator. Just stood there, holding the mic and whispering, 'You're okay, we've got you.'" Mason felt his chest tighten. He'd heard of that story, an old production legend. No one ever mentioned the boom op's name, but Keanu had remembered. "Not a single person gave that boom op credit," Keanu continued. "No rap gift, no shout out, not even a thank you. But without them, that scene wouldn't exist. That film wouldn't have worked." Thousands of miles away, in a wardrobe storage room in London, a costume trainee named Eliza had been sorting a rack of period gowns while half listening to the call on her phone. But now, she stood frozen, one hand over her mouth. She didn't know why it hit her so hard. Maybe it was the tone of his voice. Maybe it was that she'd once done something small to help an actor on set, something no one saw, and had gone home thinking, It didn't matter. The elderly man, now she wondered if maybe, just maybe, it had. In Atlanta, a janitor named Harold sat in the back of a break room with a sandwich in hand. He had been sweeping near the side door when the name Harold from Lot C floated across the speakers. Keanu was still talking. Used to sweep out the base camp trailers before the cast arrived, he said, always with jazz playing in his earbuds. I remember the smell of lemon polish and how the floor always shined. Harold's sandwich slipped from his hands. He looked around the room. No one else was there, just the monitor playing the feed and the sound of his name spoken by someone he thought would never know he existed. Keanu kept going. It's time someone does something for them, he said quietly. Really for them. Not with an Instagram post, not with a photo op, but with action. With something that tells them they're not disposable. That this industry isn't just about the front of the camera. His voice trembled on the last few words. In a soundstage trailer outside Vancouver, a second assistant director named Priya was hunched over the next day's call sheet, eyes dry and stinging from another 14-hour turnaround. She hadn't intended to stay on the call after Keanu's appearance, but something in his voice, it was too human, too unguarded to ignore. Now her cursor blinked on the screen, forgotten. She was hearing things no one ever said out loud in the industry. I see how hard they work, Keanu said. The riggers with bruises on their arms, the art department sleeping on site because they ran out of budget for extra help, and the PAs, God, the PAs, running themselves into the ground for less than minimum wage just to get a foot in the door. Priya swallowed hard. She had started as a PA. She remembered crying in her car one night after being yelled at for not bringing the correct kind of granola bar for a lead actor. That had been 6 years ago. No one had ever acknowledged what it took to stay. Until now. Keanu's voice cracked. I remember asking a production assistant how many days in a row she'd worked without rest. She smiled and said, "Only 10. This week's been light." She laughed when she said it. But there was nothing funny about it. In a downtown Chicago warehouse turned makeshift green room for a low-budget shoot, the hair and makeup team huddled around a tablet screen. Amanda, the lead stylist, had paused her work when someone whispered, "Keanu's still talking." Now she sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes wet, phone forgotten in her lap. I don't want to wait until someone dies to say thank you, Keanu said softly. I don't want to send flowers to a funeral when I could have sent food to their fridge. His voice cracked again, just slightly, but enough to make every listener still connected sit forward. In the chat, someone typed, "Is crying," and another, "Hell means it." In New Jersey, a man named Toby sat alone in his kitchen, headset on, jobless after being laid off from a backlot team the year before. He hadn't intended to join the call, but used an old staff login. He was hoping to feel connected to something again. And now here was Keanu, talking like he'd been in the mud with them all along. We give awards for acting, Keanu said, but we forget the person holding the mic in the rain, the woman hauling makeup kits up 3 flights of stairs, the guy who brings everyone coffee without being asked. And it's not about paying them back with words. It's about changing what we value. Silence followed. Not because no one knew what to say, but because everything had been said. Every quiet worker in the film world, every overlooked crew member, every assistant who thought their work didn't matter, was hearing their story being told in real time by someone they never expected would see them. Back in the conference command room, Chloe had stopped trying to fix anything. Her hands rested on the desk now, her eyes fixed on the participant feed. Hundreds were still logged in, faces still visible. Some had gone off camo to cry. Others leaned forward, eyes shimmering with quiet reverence. No one moved. No one spoke. Keanu's voice filled the silence once more. You know what I remember most from that movie we shot in winter? He asked. It wasn't the premiere, wasn't the reviews. It was Eduardo. the guy who drove the shuttle van. One morning, he showed up with a tray of hot drinks, paid for out of his own pocket. No cameras, no credit, just kindness. I asked why. He said, "Everyone looks tired. I just wanted to help." In a home office in Portland, Eduardo's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't driven for a production since that winter. He'd always wondered if anyone remembered him at all. Now he knew. Jake's voice came through the stream, quiet with awe. "Do you realize how many people would never believe this if they weren't hearing it themselves?" Keanu gave a soft laugh. "I hope they do believe it. I hope they know I've been listening, watching, maybe not always saying something, but carrying it with me." He cleared his throat. "I think that's what broke me, Jake. The silence. The years of watching incredible people vanish from sets because their backs gave out. Or they couldn't afford to stay, and no one called, no one followed up. It was like they never existed." His voice cracked again. He didn't try to hide it. "I don't want to be another person who says, 'That's just how it is.' I want to be the person who says, 'That's how it was, and it ends here.'" A production scheduler in Texas named Sandra put her hand over her chest. She'd worked 37 productions. She had never once been thanked publicly. But today, it didn't matter, because today someone had remembered all of them. Keanu's voice continued, softer now. "We can't fix everything, but we can stop pretending these people don't matter. We can stop walking past them without asking how they're doing. We can stop celebrating the final product and start honoring the human cost behind it." On one of the video feeds, a boom operator in New York City stood from his chair and saluted his laptop. Another grip in a Detroit garage whispered, "Finally." In a studio cafeteria in Los Angeles, the kitchen staff had paused lunch service. One of the cooks stood by the laptop, eyes rimmed red, repeating the words to himself. "You matter. You're seen." And then Keanu said one last thing. "I don't want the lighthouse to be about me. I want it to be about them. The ones who make the shadows disappear. The ones who hold the light." The feed was still live, but something had shifted. No one listening could look at their work the same again. Because in that unguarded moment, without planning, without polish, one man had opened a door and let the forgotten walk into the light. Keanu's voice grew quieter. The rhythm of his words slowed. Something in his tone shifted. Not just emotional now, but heavier, as if he was reaching for something long buried. "There's one person I keep thinking about," he said. His name was Dave Montoya. He was a set carpenter. On a tablet screen in Vancouver, a production assistant named Liza sat up straight. She knew that name. Everyone who had been in the business long enough did. Dave had worked quietly behind the scenes on dozens of films. No awards, no interviews, just solid work, day in and day out. "Hell was one of the first people I really watched on a set," Keanu continued. "Not because he wanted attention, but because of how he treated people." There was a pause, and then Keanu added, "He taught me more about integrity than any actor ever did." Jake said nothing. The connection remained quiet on his end. "Had get to the site before sunrise," Keanu said. "Sometimes he'd bring extra gloves for the younger crew. Sometimes he'd fix someone else's work without saying a word. Just did it. Smiled. Moved on." The memory made Keanu's voice warm for a moment. "Hell made this little shelf once," he said. "Between scenes I'd sit on it, read lines, drink my coffee. He never asked for credit. I didn't know until years later that he'd built it for me. Just noticed I didn't have a place to rest between setups." In the silence of the virtual call, listeners across the world leaned in. The moment felt like someone opening an old photo album no one knew existed. Keanu took a slow breath. "Neil passed away a few years ago. Cancer. It hit fast." He stopped. When he spoke again, the words came slower, heavier. "I donated to his family, quietly, anonymously. Helped cover some bills, paid for his grandson's school books. But I never told them it was me." Another pause. I thought, maybe that was the humble thing to do. He inhaled deeply. But honestly, I think I just didn't want to face the fact that I'd never told him how much he meant to me. A few more seconds of silence. I should have looked him in the eye and told him he mattered. In a lighting truck outside a Nashville studio, a veteran named Ray closed his eyes. He had worked with Dave Montoya once, 20 years ago. Dave had helped him fix a broken rig on a rainy night without saying a word. Ray never forgot it. Hearing this now, he whispered to himself. He remembered. Keanu's voice had dropped so low it was almost a whisper. I thought there would always be time. One more day on set, one more chance to say thank you. But that day never came. I carried that guilt with me, Keanu said. Still do. Jake was still silent, the line open but holding space. He knew Keanu didn't need a reply right now. He just needed to speak. And everyone else, still unknowingly listening in, understood the same. I started this career thinking I'd be shaped by the actors I worked with, that maybe I'd pick up grace from the legends, discipline from the directors, maybe a few lessons about fame or craft along the way. Keanu's voice stayed steady but soft. But it wasn't them, it was people like Dave. There was a pause, a breath. The quiet ones. The early arrivals. The last to leave. The people who gave more than they took, who never needed a spotlight. Dave would work through lunch breaks just so others wouldn't fall behind. He'd let younger guys take credit so they could get hired again. He exhaled again. And I never told him he was the reason I stayed grounded. In a small apartment in Long Beach, Dave Montoya's daughter Rosa sat frozen in front of her laptop. She had randomly joined the virtual event using an old invite link, out of nostalgia, really. Her father had helped build the stages for Green Horizons' earliest projects. When Keanu said his name, she thought she imagined it. But now, she knew. Tears streamed down her face. Keanu kept going. I remember once, we had this snow scene to film. The wind chill was brutal. Everyone was bundled up, actors in heated tents between takes. But Dave, he was out there, hammering supports into the frozen ground. I asked him if he wanted to take a break. He smiled and said, "The wind doesn't wait, so neither can I." Jake let out a quiet breath. Man. Keanu chuckled once, but it faded quickly. After he passed, I asked around, wanted to know how people remembered him. They all said the same thing. He made things better just by being there. There was a long silence. Then Keanu said, "But I never said that to his face. Never gave him a letter. Never told his wife how much he impacted me, until years later. And even then, I left out the truth." Jake's voice, low and reflective now, finally returned. "You did what you could." "No," Keanu said, with soft finality. "I did what I thought was comfortable." That sentence hit hard for everyone listening. In a post-production studio in Seattle, a colorist named Darren leaned back in his chair, eyes red. He had once worked on a project Dave helped build. He remembered how Dave passed him a sandwich during an all-night edit session when the crew forgot meals were delayed. It was the kind of gesture you remember, more than any paycheck. Now hearing this, he whispered aloud, "He mattered." He mattered. Keanu continued. "I think about all the people like Dave who quietly gave this industry its foundation. We say we stand on the shoulders of giants, but sometimes those giants were the people holding the ladder steady while we climbed. No one typed in the chat. No one moved. They were listening not to a celebrity, not even to a leader, but to a man asking himself how to love better. Well, it still mattered." Keanu's voice softened even more, barely above a murmur. "I think that's why the lighthouse matters so much to me. It's not just about helping people now. It's about honoring the ones we lost without ever saying the words they deserve to hear." He paused, and for a few seconds, there was only silence. A stillness that felt sacred. "Maybe I can't go back and tell Dave what he meant to me," he said, "but I can make sure no one else gets forgotten like that. I can try, at least." In a prop warehouse in Austin, a young technician named Jordan sat in a plastic chair, gripping the armrests like the words were anchoring him. He had lost a mentor 2 years ago to a sudden heart attack on set. No public acknowledgement, no email from the studio, just an empty chair and a rescheduled production calendar. Today was the first time anyone had said out loud what he had felt since then. "I think we live in a world that teaches us to move on too quickly," Keanu continued. "To keep working, keep producing, keep performing. But somewhere in all that motion, we lose the small moments, the ones that actually hold us together." Jake asked, "Do you think it'll make a difference?" Keanu took a long pause. "I don't know," he said, "but it has to be better than silence." He let out a shaky breath. Silence never healed anyone. Across the globe, the people listening were no longer just employees or freelancers or crew. They were human beings, sitting quietly with their own regrets, their own unsaid thank yous, their own Dave Montoyas. Keanu's voice grew stronger now, not louder, but more certain. "If we want the next generation to stay in this industry, to feel safe, seen, supported, then someone has to go first. Someone has to be willing to say, 'I see you,' before it's too late." Jake didn't reply. He didn't have to. Because Keanu had just said what hundreds of people had been waiting their whole lives to hear. "I should have looked him in the eye and told him he mattered," Keanu repeated, almost like a prayer. "So now, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure no one else dies wondering if they did." The line went quiet again, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of the names that had never been spoken, the sacrifices that had gone unseen, the grief that had been carried alone for too long. And from that silence, something new was taking shape. The beginning of redemption. The start of something more. Keanu's voice carried a new kind of energy now. It was no longer weighed down by regret. It was lifting into something else. A vision. A mission forming in real time, shaped by years of silence, by names that had never been spoken, and by the memory of the people who had given so much. "I've been thinking about what it would look like," he said. "The Lighthouse Fund. It can't be complicated. It can't be slow. It has to be something real, something fast, something that shows up when people need it most." Jake's voice came back, curious now. "Like what? What would it actually do?" Keanu didn't even pause. "Full tuition scholarships," he said, "for the children of crew members. No essays, no bureaucracy, just proof of enrollment and we pay the bill. Because those kids deserve a shot." In a break room in Miami, a set decorator named Camille wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Her daughter had just been accepted into a college they couldn't afford. Camille hadn't known how to break it to her yet. Now she just sat frozen, staring at her screen. Keanu kept going, his tone growing with quiet momentum. "And housing grants for the janitors and night staff who hold the studio together after everyone else goes home. I've met men who sleep in their cars because rent in the city is more than half their pay. That's not right. Not when this industry makes billions." In the chat, someone typed, "He's serious." Another wrote, "This would change lives." But Keanu still didn't know they were listening. He was speaking into what he thought was privacy, and somehow that made it all the more sincere. "No more one-time checks or photo ops," he continued. "We build a system that listens. Crew members apply anonymously. No shame, no interviews, just help. Because when someone is falling apart, the last thing they need is more hoops to jump through." Jake said, "You've thought this through." "I've lived it," Keanu replied. "I've watched people break their backs for this business. I've seen marriages fall apart because of the hours. I've seen brilliant artists leave because they couldn't afford to stay. We're losing the soul of this industry while we pretend everything is fine." He took a short breath and added, "The lighthouse is for them. For the ones who hold the boom, clean the trailers, run the errands, bandage the injuries, drive the vans. For the ones who always show up, no matter the weather, no matter the time, no matter the pain. In a tech office in Toronto, a script coordinator named Devon looked across the table at his colleague and simply nodded. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because at that moment, Keanu wasn't just dreaming out loud. He was rebuilding a broken system from the inside. "I want it to be quiet," Keanu said. "No press releases, no red carpets. Just action. Quiet kindness that shows up exactly when someone thinks they're alone." He paused, then added with conviction, "And it has to include mental health care." Jake responded with immediate support. "Absolutely. I've worked with grips who haven't seen their families in weeks," Keanu continued. "I've watched costumers break down in supply closets. I've seen PAs cry in silence while waiting in line for wrap meals. This job can eat you alive from the inside out, and no one talks about that." In Los Angeles, a union rep named Sharon sat quietly at her desk, blinking back tears. She had spent years trying to push for better mental health coverage for below-the-line workers. It often felt like no one cared. But now someone was saying exactly what she'd wanted the world to hear. Keanu's voice was calm but clear. "I want to fund free counseling sessions, provide emergency hotel stays for when someone can't go home, build a system where the response time is hours, not weeks." Jake said, "That's going to cost a lot." Keanu answered without hesitation, "Then I'll give a lot." For the first time during the entire stream, his voice sharpened. "I've made more money than I ever expected to. And yeah, I've given to charities, causes, campaigns. But this is something I can put my name behind and not feel like I'm performing." He softened again. "Because it's not about being a star, it's about being a person. And these are the people who shaped me into one." In a studio loft in Brooklyn, an assistant editor named Marcus watched from his lunch break. He had just been thinking about quitting, burned out, underpaid, exhausted. But now, something stirred in him. He didn't know if the lighthouse would change everything, but it changed how he felt in that moment. He felt remembered. Back on the stream, Keanu continued, "I want this to be modeled after the people who inspired it. Anonymous, consistent, kind. Like Dave Montoya, like Gloria, the sound tech who used to bring coffee for the entire B camera team. Like Raymond, the security guard who stood outside for 12 hours in the cold just to make sure we all felt safe." He exhaled slowly. "We lose too many people, not to death, but to exhaustion, to burnout, to silence." Jake didn't respond. He couldn't. There was too much in the air already. "I want the lighthouse to be a place that says, you don't have to disappear quietly." In the virtual town hall, where hundreds still listened unseen, many had tears on their cheeks now. Some had hands pressed over their mouths. Others simply closed their eyes and let it sink in. Because for the first time, someone was building something just for them. "I'm not trying to save the industry," Keanu said softly, "but I can start by saving the people who've been carrying it the whole time." He shifted slightly. The sound of a chair creaked faintly. There was a pause, long enough to feel sacred, but not long enough to break the moment. "I want to do something before I'm too late again," he said. "I don't want to wake up in 10 years and realize I stayed quiet because I was afraid people would misunderstand." Jake finally spoke, his voice low. "They won't misunderstand." "They might," Keanu replied, "but that's okay. It's not for everyone to understand. It's for the ones who have been breaking themselves down just to keep the show running." In a soundproof room in Sydney, a lighting designer named Aidan gripped the arms of his chair. He had worked 53 shows over 2 decades. He'd slept on more floors than beds. He'd missed birthdays, funerals, even his own son's graduation. Now, for the first time, someone was acknowledging what that cost. Keanu went on, "I want to build a council," he said. "Not studio heads, not celebrities, people from the crew, set builders, electricians, makeup artists, loaders, interns. Let them decide where the money goes. Let them tell me who's hurting, who's fallen through the cracks. Jake sounded surprised. You won't even control it? Keanu answered gently. I've been at the top. This isn't about control, it's about trust. There was a long silence. Then Keanu spoke again, this time with more resolve. I want to name the first grant after Dave. The air changed. Dave Montoya never asked for anything, Keanu said, but he gave everything. So the first person we help, whoever they are, they'll be the Montoya grant. And every year, we'll pick a different name, a different invisible giant. In a small trailer lot in Arizona, a grip named Ellis wiped his eyes and quietly stood. His father had worked with Montoya, passed years ago, unrecognized, but this moment felt like a hand reaching through time to lift his memory back into the light. I want the Lighthouse Fund to outlive me, Keanu said, because the people it's for, they've always lived in the background. It's time they had a light of their own. Back in the digital command room, Chloe Hammond leaned back in her chair. Her monitor showed 542 participants still connected. Her eyes were glassy. Her hands were still. In the chat, someone had typed just 2 words. We matter. No one responded. They didn't need to. Because in that quiet, unfiltered moment, something historic had been born. Not from a press conference. Not from a campaign. But from a man's voice speaking into what he thought was silence and being heard by everyone who needed it most. The audio still streamed quietly as Keanu's voice began to fade into stillness. But across the world, the impact had only just begun. In a cramped apartment in Van Nuys, a retired set dresser named Lorraine sat in her worn recliner, the live stream still open on her old tablet. She hadn't planned to join the meeting. She wasn't even sure her credentials still worked, but someone had forwarded her the link, and out of curiosity, or maybe loneliness, she logged in. Now, she couldn't look away. Keanu's voice had triggered something deep inside. Not just empathy, not just admiration. Memory. She blinked, staring at the frozen screen, and whispered, "He remembered us." 30 years ago, Lorraine had been on a gritty, low-budget crime film. Long hours, cold nights, no budget for overtime. She was in charge of setting up the living room scene for a character's emotional breakdown. The producer stormed in, furious over how long it was taking, yelled at her, threatened to fire her on the spot. Keanu had been in the corner, already in costume. He stepped forward and said, "She's building something real. Give her the time." The producer backed off. Lorraine never forgot it. She never got to thank him. But now, watching him speak so openly about people like her, felt like that moment had finally come full circle. In a quiet house on the outskirts of Calgary, a former on-set medic named Nina sat with her laptop open. Her hands trembled. She hadn't seen Keanu in 15 years. She had been the first to reach him after a stunt accident, one that nearly cost him his ability to walk. She kept him calm, checked his vitals, and stabilized his back while they waited for the ambulance. No one remembered her name. The production company barely acknowledged her in the safety report. But Keanu had looked her in the eye that day, even in pain, and said, "You saved me." She never forgot that. And tonight, hearing his voice again, hearing him talk about set medics and the ones who hold people together, Nina whispered out loud, "He remembered me." In a basement editing suite in Dublin, a colorist named Sean sat with his headphones still on, even though there was no new audio playing. His mind had gone back to the rainy shoot in the Scottish Highlands. He was pulling a triple shift, missed dinner, fell asleep at his desk. When he woke up, there was a note stuck to his screen. It read, "Eat, sleep. You matter." No signature. But the handwriting was clear. It was Keanu's. He never told anyone. Thought it was just a moment between them. Now, as he listened to the voice echoing through the empty conference line, Sean closed his eyes and nodded slowly. That glitch, The open mic had become more than an accident. It had become a portal, one that reached into the past and made long-forgotten kindnesses shine again. In a cafe 2 blocks from the Warner backlot, a barista named Miguel stood frozen behind the counter. He had stepped away from the espresso machine to check his phone during a lull in orders. Someone from Props had texted him a link to the live stream with one word: listen. He had met Keanu only once. It was during reshoots for a sci-fi film. Miguel had been called in to deliver drinks when catering fell through. He showed up late, nervous and drenched from the rain. Most of the cast ignored him. He fumbled a tray of lattes, spilling one across the pavement. Keanu was the only one who came over, helped him gather the cups, paid for the spilled drinks without a word, then handed him his own coat. Miguel had never told anyone. Now, hearing Keanu speak with such care about small moments, Miguel realized something. He hadn't imagined that kindness. It was real, and it had mattered. In the audio department of a major studio in London, a veteran boom operator named Fiona leaned against the wall. The name Keanu Reeves had meant a lot to her for decades, not because of his fame, but because of a moment that still lived rent-free in her memory. It was a winter shoot, bitter cold. Fiona was holding a long pole over her head for take after take. Her shoulders ached. She didn't complain, she never did. But between setups, Keanu had noticed. He walked over with a heated hand warmer, the kind actors usually kept in their pockets. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just looked at her and said, "You okay?" When she nodded, he placed the warmer in her glove and gave her a smile. Now, as she listened to his voice echo through the open conference channel, Fiona remembered every detail of that moment. The way he noticed, the way he cared, and now the way he remembered all of them. In a dim room in Detroit, an aging truck driver named Cecil listened with his wife at the kitchen table. He had retired 5 years ago after hauling equipment for productions across the Midwest. Long nights, tight deadlines, little thanks. But one day, during a massive shoot, the lead actor himself had walked past Cecil and stopped. "Thanks for driving through the night," the man had said. "We couldn't have done this without you." It was Keanu. And now, hearing him describe the Lighthouse Fund and the people it was meant for, Cecil felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't realized how badly he needed to hear that it wasn't all forgotten. Even retired, even removed from the chaos of set life, he had carried that hunger for recognition. And tonight, that hunger had been answered. In dozens of rooms across continents, from big studios to one-bedroom apartments, people were crying. Not because of a tragedy, but because someone had remembered the work they thought no one ever saw. Keanu's mic had stayed open, but what it really opened was memory. And in that collective remembering, something sacred had begun to heal. In a quiet media suite on the 20th floor of a high-rise in Century City, 3 communications executives sat around a muted laptop screen. The stream was still active, the chat still flickering. Keanu's voice had finally stopped, but the silence he left behind was louder than anything they had heard all year. Janelle, a veteran studio publicist, folded her arms tightly. "We're sitting on a PR moment that would break the internet in 10 minutes, she said flatly. Across from her, Hugo Chang, a senior entertainment journalist for an online magazine, rubbed his temples. "It's too pure," he said. "Too raw. You write about this and you ruin it." A younger executive named Devin, barely 3 years into his role as digital strategist for a streaming platform, looked up from his phone. "You're both insane. Do you know how many outlets would pay for this transcript? Keanu Reeves launching a secret global relief fund accidentally? That's gold." "But it wasn't meant to be heard," Hugo replied. "That changes everything." Janelle shook her head. "He didn't even know he was still being recorded. You run that story, and it turns something sacred into spectacle." Devin leaned back, eyes skeptical. You think the public would trash him? They'd worship him. He'd be a saint. That's not the point, Janelle said firmly. This isn't about attention. That's the whole lesson. He did this because it mattered, not because he wanted anyone to clap. Hugel nodded slowly. If we report it, we steal it. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the HVAC and the occasional ding of new Slack messages arriving. Janelle finally spoke again, more quietly now. There are some stories the world doesn't need to read, it just needs to feel them. Devin didn't push back. Not because he fully agreed, but because something in the room had changed. Even he, the youngest and most numbers-driven of them all, couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. No clickbait headline could do it justice. No post could carry the weight of what Keanu had said when he thought he was alone. Meanwhile, back in the homes, trailers, and lots of the people who had been listening, a different kind of movement had begun. The chat had slowed. The stream was still running. But now, something else was happening. Letters, emails, handwritten notes scanned and attached to personal messages. From makeup artists in Atlanta, from transport drivers in Vancouver, from set designers in New Orleans, and night crew from Sydney. No one organized them, no campaign prompted it. But one by one, the messages started arriving in Keanu's team inbox. I just wanted to say thank you. You probably don't remember me, but you helped me believe in what I do again. I never expected a movie star to see someone like me. They arrived in bursts, quietly, some typed with shaking hands, some written with full names, some sent anonymously, and in every one of them, the same sentiment echoed. You made me feel visible. In a modest office just outside Pasadena, Keanu's longtime assistant Marie sat behind her laptop late into the night. Her inbox, normally filled with scheduling requests and event invitations, now overflowed with messages that looked entirely different. No subject lines screamed urgency. No media requests. Just soft words like "thank you," "I was there," or "I finally felt seen." She opened one from a camera loader in New Zealand. He had written, "You probably won't remember me, but I carried gear for your film in 2004. I was 22 and broke. You tipped me enough that I bought my sister a birthday gift that year. I never told you what it meant. Now, I think you knew all along." Marie read another from a woman in Prague who had done craft services. She wrote about how Keanu once sat next to her on a break and asked how her son was doing. No cameras, no entourage, just a quiet conversation she never forgot. Each message seemed to be a mirror, showing Keanu the countless lives he had touched in the smallest, quietest ways. Back in the industry's inner circles, something unexpected was happening. Producers whispered to each other in backlot corridors. Agents passed the story in coded language. "Did you hear about the glitch?" But no one leaked the clip. Not one frame made it to the press. Not a single journalist ran the story. In the age of instant exposure, virality, and spin, a collective silence held. Not because of legal threats or NDAs, but because of something deeper. Respect. Some called it a miracle. Others, a once-in-a-generation moment of integrity. But for the crew members and support staff who heard Keanu's voice that day, it was something else entirely. It was proof that the invisible were not forgotten. It was healing for years of quiet suffering. And it was a call to be better, to notice more, to lead with kindness. A week after the broadcast, in the quiet of the post-event lull, a new rumor began to spread. Not online, not in tabloids, but in whispered conversations between night shift janitors, camera ops, and assistant directors. The Lighthouse Fund was real. Somehow, within days, small grants began appearing. An anonymous gift covered the rent of a lighting tech in Queens. Another wiped out the medical debt of a retired set painter in Nevada. A film school tuition bill vanished overnight for the daughter of a best boy in Dallas. No press release ever came. No donor names were shared. But those who knew, knew. In the months that followed, no studio claimed credit, no network tried to capitalize on the moment, and Keanu himself never mentioned it publicly. But the letters kept arriving. Handwritten thank yous, sketches from children, photographs of wrapped cables, broken boots, call sheets, and sunsets over tired sets. Tokens of gratitude from the people who held the industry together long after the lights went out. What began as a technical glitch had become a legend. Not one crafted for audiences, but one whispered between the people who had always worked in silence and now finally knew someone had been listening all along. And I guess I just never got to tell him that he mattered, Keanu's voice said, barely audible now, low and gravelly with emotion. The line trembled for a moment, then it stopped. Not faded, not gently eased into silence. Just gone. A hard click, an abrupt end. After exactly 17 minutes, the audio feed from Keanu Reeves disconnected, mid-sentence, without warning. The screen remained blank, his video off since the end of his formal presentation, but now there was nothing. No voice, no background noise, no static. Just stillness. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one typed. Hundreds of participants, lighting techs, costumers, interns, producers, drivers, janitors, assistants, stared at their screens in stunned silence. Each one frozen, not by what they had seen, but by what they had just felt. And then the chat ignited. Was that real? Did anyone else hear that? Keanu was crying. Oh my God, I think I'm shaking. Don't let this disappear. The moderator, a cheerful young studio manager named Troy, fumbled to regain composure. His camera switched on. He blinked, adjusted his mic, and cleared his throat nervously. Well, thank you, everyone, for that incredible kickoff presentation, he said, his voice strained and not quite meeting the moment. We'll now move on to the sustainability metrics update presented by our facilities director. But no one clicked away. No one shifted their focus. Even as the next presentation began, with a graph about LED lighting usage and carbon offsets, the virtual eyes of the audience stayed glazed, their minds far away from charts and numbers. In an engineering office in Atlanta, a janitor named Darius leaned back in his chair and wiped his face. He hadn't even realized he was crying until he saw the back of his hand. On a studio lot in Burbank, a costume assistant named Elena sat alone at a folding table in the break room. She didn't move. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. Her laptop screen showed the same conference dashboard as everyone else's, but she was somewhere else entirely. Back in the IT room, Chloe Hammond exhaled for the first time in minutes. Her team stared at the panel of diagnostics, still baffled by what had just occurred. She turned to her assistant, Tom. What did you do? Tom looked up. Nothing. I mean, everything was locked, and then it just stopped on its own. They both stared at the monitor in silence. It's like the system let go, Chloe murmured. She walked to the back of the server room and sat down on the edge of a storage crate, her hands trembling just slightly. She had heard every second of that call, and she knew deep down that it wasn't a malfunction. It was a moment, an unscripted, wholly unexpected moment. The kind that can't be replicated, the kind that can't be forced. It was, as she would later whisper to a colleague over lunch, something the universe wanted them all to hear. Across dozens of cities and countries, the people, still connected to the call, sat in silence long after the glitch ended. They weren't just co-workers now. They were witnesses. And something had shifted in all of them. In an editing bay in Vancouver, Greg, a sound technician who'd worked on one of Keanu's early indie films, stood up, walked to the wall, and took down a dusty crew photo he hadn't looked at in years. He stared at it, traced the edge with his finger, and said quietly, "He remembers." In a corner office in Sydney, a senior set decorator named Fiona, closed her laptop mid-slide presentation. She didn't ask permission. She didn't send a follow-up email. She simply opened her notebook and began writing a letter to Keanu. The moderator continued with the schedule, trying to mask the growing sense that the rest of the town hall didn't matter anymore. Speakers cycled through updates and slides, metrics were discussed, initiatives announced, but the chat never returned to business. People dropped in only to say things like, "I feel different now. Did he know we were still here? Why does this feel like a goodbye? I've never heard anyone in this industry say those things." By then, Chloe had already saved a copy of the system log. She knew better than to keep a recording, even though the call was technically archived. But she highlighted the exact 17-minute window as if it were sacred. She opened a blank document and typed the time, 10:43 a.m. to 11:00 a.m. Then she wrote one line beneath it. The moment it all changed. A week later, she would print it out, fold it, and place it into a drawer in her desk with no label. By evening, word had begun to spread, but not in tabloids, not on Twitter or industry blogs. It spread like a whisper passed from hand to hand. People said, "Were you on the call?" Others asked, "Is it true he cried?" And some simply said, "I didn't know he carried all that." At Green Horizon Studios, the official event summary left out the glitch entirely. It listed key metrics, thanked Keanu for his participation, and moved on as if nothing had happened. But no one who was there could pretend. The intern who had just started last Monday now walked differently on set. She noticed the janitor who swept the halls at night. She left him a muffin the next day and didn't say who it was from. The lighting assistant in Albuquerque bought an extra case of water for the grips. No explanation, just a gesture. And in London, that costume trainee who had covered her mouth during the call, she later found Keanu's mailing address and sent a single sentence in a letter. "You made me feel visible. I will never forget it." The glitch ended, but the impact didn't. And though Keanu himself remained silent, never referencing what had happened, never mentioning the broadcast, those 17 minutes had etched something into the hearts of hundreds of people. Not damage, but healing. It didn't start with headlines. There were no viral clips, no breaking tweets, no grainy audio leaked onto social media. Instead, it spread like breath on glass, quiet, foggy, vanishing if you looked too hard. The first murmur came from a costume trailer in downtown LA, a secondhand story. A woman named Marla, who'd been on the call, leaned across a sewing machine to whisper to her assistant, "You won't believe what Keanu said." Her voice trembled with something more than awe. It was reverence. The assistant asked for details, but Marla shook her head. I think it wasn't meant to be broadcast, but it changed me." 3 blocks away, in a prop warehouse, a gaffer named Troy sipped his coffee and asked a passing PA if she'd heard about the glitch. When she hadn't, he paused, debating whether to share. Then he smiled and said, "Let's just say, not all heroes wear capes. Some forget to mute their mic." By the end of the week, the phrase, "Did you hear what Keanu said?" had been spoken in hushed tones in at least 6 different studio lots. Not everyone knew exactly what happened, but everyone knew something had happened. The stories shifted as they spread. Some said he cried, others said he confessed, some believed he made an announcement, some thought he was reading a letter. It didn't matter that the facts got fuzzy. What mattered was the feeling that something rare had occurred, something beautiful, something human. In a cafe on Melrose, 2 set designers sat with their sketchbooks, pretending to work. But they were talking about the moment, as it had begun to be called. One of them, Naomi, pulled out a notebook and read a few scribbled lines. Not exact quotes, but impressions she'd written down that day. "Hell said the magic doesn't come from the top," she read softly. "It comes from the people holding the boom pole, from the ones sweeping the floor before sunrise." Her friend wiped her eyes. Around them, life went on. Dishes clattered, phones rang, orders were shouted. but something invisible wove between the coffee cups and camera bags, a sense that the industry had been cracked open for a second, and everyone had glimpsed something gentler inside. The story reached New York, then Toronto. It was passed between drivers on cold film lots in Vancouver. It made its way to sound stages in Prague, Cape Town, and even Seoul. No media outlet ever covered it. No journalist dared chase it. Not because they couldn't, but because those who had been on the call, the few PR reps, assistants, and executives with access, chose not to break it open. They'd protected it. They preserved it. They understood that if it became clickbait, it would lose its power. So the whisper grew legs, not headlines. Back at Green Horizon Studios, something even more unusual began to unfold. In the backlot, taped to the side of a coffee truck that served breakfast burritos and espresso to early risers, a small paper sign appeared. The Lighthouse Fund. You're seen, you matter. No explanation, no logo, no one claimed it. But the people who had been on the call, those who had heard, knew exactly what it meant. By the next morning, another copy of the phrase showed up in a grip truck at Universal, then again in a folding chair at Warner Bros., then again scribbled in chalk near the base of a lighting rig at an indie production in Brooklyn. The Lighthouse Fund hadn't even launched. It hadn't even been publicly announced, but the name was already spreading. It was the phrase Keanu had uttered during that glitch, the moment he said, "It can't be another red carpet thing. I want to build a lighthouse, something that doesn't move, something that tells people, you're seen, you matter." He had no idea the call was live. But now, without a marketing campaign or press release, people were whispering it with reverence. A lighting tech named Benny, who worked mostly second-unit horror shoots, passed around an old crew photo from a set 5 years prior. In it, Keanu had joined the entire night crew for dinner, unplanned, unpaid, and unnoticed by the press. Benny circled the photo and wrote underneath, "Lighthouse Moment 1." In production offices across the country, assistants began collecting small stories like these. Help waited outside in the rain with me when my Uber got stuck. Paid off the funeral costs for a grip's father without telling anyone. I gave up his trailer one day so a sick extras coordinator could lie down. None of these made news, but every single one was retold now, freshly colored by what had happened on that 17-minute glitch. At a union hall in Burbank, someone brought a whiteboard to the monthly meeting and wrote at the top, "Who's your lighthouse?" Underneath, they listed the names of those in the industry who had helped them without asking for credit. And for the first time in a long time, people left a union meeting feeling hopeful. Crew members who had felt invisible for decades began walking into work with their heads a little higher. When they passed each other on set, they didn't just nod, they made eye contact. They said, "Thank you." They asked how the other was holding up. The culture was changing, but not because someone mandated it, not because of a company memo or policy shift. It was changing because of a voice they weren't meant to hear. Jake, Keanu's longtime friend and stunt double, later told someone in confidence, "That call? It was supposed to be a private vent. But maybe the universe needed the mic to stay open." A few months later, tucked into a stack of thank you letters sent to Keanu's agency, a card stood out. It was handmade, colored in marker, and written in a child's handwriting. He read, "Dear Mr. Reeves, my mom works late on movie sets. She came home last night and hugged me really hard. She said someone reminded her she matters. I just wanted to say thank you. Love, Ava." There was no return address. No reply was ever sent. But Keanu read every word. And in that quiet echo, the whisper kept growing. The staff Wagtown Hall had been scheduled with only 24 hours' notice. No agenda, no teaser, just a quiet calendar invite titled, "Brief message from Keanu, please join." Within minutes of the start time, over 800 attendees logged in. Assistants were dialing in from trailers, makeup artists from lunch breaks, sound mixers from parked vans outside studios. Word had spread quickly. Everyone knew what this was about. Then the screen blinked and Keanu appeared. No studio background, no lighting setup, just a neutral wall, a soft sweatshirt, and eyes that couldn't quite hide the weight of the moment. He gave a sheepish smile, ran a hand through his hair, and said, "Hey, everyone. I heard there was a thing with my mic." The chat box immediately lit up. "We heard everything. Thank you for saying what no one ever does. You have no idea what it meant." We cried. Keanu looked down, chuckled quietly, then nodded. "I wasn't going to say anything at first," he admitted. "I figured, maybe the universe just wanted to embarrass me for oversharing." More hearts flooded the chat, some laughter too. "But then," he continued, his tone shifting, "I started getting messages, letters. A few of you even dropped off things at the security desk." His voice wavered. I didn't know what to say back. He paused for a long moment. "Look, that conversation, it was meant to be private. I didn't know you were all still on. I thought I'd logged off after my speech. I was just talking to a friend, processing, venting, dreaming out loud." He looked straight into the camera. "You weren't supposed to hear all that." The chat slowed. Everyone waited for what came next. Keanu exhaled. "But maybe you needed to." He didn't rush through the words. They landed like stones in still water. "I've worked on a lot of sets. Big, small, messy, beautiful. And the truth is, every time someone thanks me or gives me credit, I think about all of you. The people behind the scenes. The ones who stay late, who get up earlier than I ever do, who fix the stuff no one sees. You're the ones who make the magic happen." A makeup artist named Jolene, watching from her tiny apartment in Toronto, pressed her hand to her heart. A camera technician named Luis, in Atlanta, typed into the chat, "No one's ever said that out loud." Keanu noticed the comments flooding in, his eyes glassed over. He smiled again, this time softer. "That day, during the glitch, I said something about building a lighthouse, about making something real. I want you to know I meant that." He hesitated, visibly emotional now. "You matter. All of you. Not just the credits, not just the job titles, but you. And I don't want to wait until someone retires or passes away to say thank you." The chat box couldn't keep up. "We see you. Thank you for seeing us. This moment will stay with me forever." Keanu blinked, taking in the onslaught of messages. His voice softened even more. "I don't want this to be about me," he said. "It never was. That conversation. It was about all the people who hold this industry up without ever asking for applause. I guess I just couldn't keep it in anymore." There was something powerful in the way he admitted it. A celebrity, a man known around the world, confessing to the quiet guilt of having waited too long to say what mattered, of not using his voice sooner, not because of fear, but because he didn't know if it would be received. Now it clearly had been. He reached off camera and brought a small notebook into frame. It was thick with handwritten tabs and creased pages. "This is something I started keeping during the lockdowns," he explained. "Every time someone on set made a difference, a PA who brought food to someone who hadn't eaten, or a grip who shared their coat with someone stuck in the rain, I'd jot it down. I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't for press or a book deal. It was just for me to remember." The chat went silent again. He flipped the book open and read a few entries aloud. December 12th, Tina, the wardrobe assistant, stayed late to mend a tear in a backup outfit no one even used. She didn't tell anyone. She just did it. April 4th, Marcus from Sound checked on a background actor who fainted, gave him water, called his wife, and stayed until the ambulance left. August 2nd, Clara, janitorial, noticed a lighting rig left too close to a puddle, moved it. No one thanked her. By the time Keanu looked up again, his eyes were full. "You're not invisible," he whispered. "Not to me." Somewhere in the stream, someone typed, We've never been seen so clearly." Others began listing their own memories in the chat crew. Meals shared, long nights in freezing studios, quiet acts of kindness that were never mentioned again until now. It became a digital mosaic of unspoken gratitude. Keanu gave a nod like he was absorbing it all, then smiled. "So, about that lighthouse." The chat buzzed with excitement. "I don't have all the answers yet," he continued, "but I'm meeting with a few people next week. Industry folks, union reps. We're putting together something real. A fund, support resources, recognition, counseling, housing stipends, something ongoing, not just a one-time check or a flashy gala." He paused. "I'd like to call it the Lighthouse Fund, because even when you can't be seen, you deserve a light pointed back at you." No one was typing now. No one needed to. He closed the notebook gently and said, "Thank you for listening, even if you weren't meant to." And then, in a moment of simple closure, he smiled and added, "I guess the mic knew better than I did." The screen faded to black, but the message remained. For a moment after the screen faded back to life, everything was still. Keanu remained seated, unaware of what was about to happen. He looked down, wiping the corner of his eye with the sleeve of his flannel shirt, attempting to compose himself. But on the other side of the screen, hundreds, perhaps thousands, were moving. Across every continent, in every time zone, in studio basements, makeshift home offices, costume trailers, grip trucks, and warehouse floors, people began to stand. There was no cue. No one said a word. But like ripples through water, it spread. In a dim-lit editing bay in Berlin, a sound engineer paused his render, slid his chair back, and slowly rose. In an Atlanta studio kitchen, a man wearing an apron and pushing a mop stopped mid-step, turned toward the monitor mounted above the supply shelves, and stood upright. His hands shook as he pulled off his gloves. In a warehouse in Burbank, an older set painter with calloused hands and flecks of dried latex on his arms rose from his folding chair and placed a hand over his chest. In London, a young costume trainee stood at her narrow desk, still in her tea-stained sweatshirt, eyes red but unwavering. Each one alone, yet connected. Keanu looked up at the screen again. His breath caught. The wall of video tiles that had once shown a mosaic of sleepy, disengaged participants now showed something entirely different. They were all standing. No words, just faces. Posture stiff with emotion, eyes brimming, lips trembling. Some had their hands over their hearts. Others held up silent peace signs. Some simply nodded. Then the feed cut briefly to a hallway camera, a studio janitor standing by a row of trash bins. He looked around sheepishly, thinking no one was watching. Then he turned to the camera, tears running down his face, and raised his hand in a shaky salute. Keanu's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He brought his hand to his mouth, closed his eyes, and exhaled hard. His shoulders trembled. He looked away, then back again. And finally, barely above a whisper, he said, "Thank you." He said it again. "Thank you." And again, until it was the only thing left in the moment that made any sense at all. Somewhere in Vancouver, an art department coordinator clapped once, instinctively, then a second time, a third. And somewhere else, someone joined in, and then someone else. It wasn't raucous, it wasn't orchestrated, but applause began to echo softly through the feeds. Like a heartbeat, gentle but steady. Keanu didn't move. He sat there in silence, hands folded, absorbing every beat, every face, every standing soul. The weight of years, the thankless jobs, the forgotten credits, the sleepless nights. All of it felt seen. And for the first time in a long time, those who usually worked behind the scenes realized something profound. They mattered. Somewhere in that swelling tide of human reaction, Chloe Hammond, still at her station in the conference tech hub, stood too. She didn't even realize she'd pushed her chair back. Her hands rested gently on the table as she stared at the screen, her lips parted in awe. Her assistant, Marcus, glanced over at her and followed suit, rising slowly. All around them, the hum of machinery and blinking indicator lights fell into the background. In that moment, hierarchy melted. It didn't matter who was an executive and who was a set PA. It didn't matter whose names rolled in credits and whose didn't. Across the entire studio ecosystem, from the top floors of management to the windowless rooms of post-production, everyone stood because something inside them had shifted. Keanu's accidental broadcast had cracked open something quiet, something sacred, and now they couldn't ignore it. In the Zoom chat, a flood of messages poured in, short, raw, and deeply human. "You saw me. You actually saw me. My dad worked Boone for 30 years. You just gave his memory dignity. Been crying at my desk for 10 minutes. Thank you for reminding us why we do this." But no one spoke aloud, not even Keanu. He just let it happen. The emotions were too dense for commentary, too sacred for filler words. In Rio de Janeiro, a young lighting tech stood barefoot in his small apartment. He had only joined the call out of curiosity, never expecting to feel anything. But now he stood with his arms at his sides, staring into the grainy webcam, feeling like, for the first time in his life, he was part of something that reached beyond his city, beyond language, beyond paycheck. In a hospital room in Toronto, an on-call medic who once worked second unit on a Reeves movie years ago sat up in her bed, phone in hand. She had been there the day Keanu suffered a minor injury during a stunt. She remembered how polite he was even while bleeding, how he had insisted on asking her name, how he had thanked her, not just as a reflex, but with real eye contact. As the screen filled with images of people standing, she placed her hand over her heart and said aloud to no one in particular, "He never forgot. He never forgot me." In a dusty trailer on a remote location shoot in Arizona, a production coordinator paused the call, stood, and looked around the cramped space. She had spent her entire career chasing budgets, calming tempers, and cleaning up messes. It had never been glamorous. Sometimes it barely felt human. But now, in the silence after Keanu's thank you, something opened in her chest. She stood taller. It wasn't just a virtual standing ovation. It was a recalibration. Keanu lowered his head. Then he looked back at the screen and smiled through tears. Not the rehearsed, glossy kind, but the real, cracked smile of someone who just witnessed something too big to process in the moment. He leaned closer to his camera. "I don't know what to say, honestly. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Someone in the chat wrote, "That's why it mattered." Another wrote, "Please don't apologize for honesty." Keanu nodded slowly. "I meant what I said. All of it. Every frame we shoot, every scene that works. It only happens because of people most of the world never sees. I've always known it, but now you all do too. And maybe that's enough for something to change." He blinked hard and whispered one more time, "Thank you." Then he reached for the button. But before he could click to end the call, something happened. On one of the screens, a woman in her 60s raised her hand slowly. She stood in the corner of a cramped prop room somewhere in Chicago. Her name tag read MRS, Daily Proper Chive. She didn't speak, but she raised a small item toward the screen. It was a prop from one of Keanu's earliest films. A small, foam med action pistol, scuffed, painted, forgotten by most. She mouthed, "Still got it," with a smile. Keanu let out a single breathy laugh, shaking his head. "Still got it," he echoed. "That says it all." And then he finally clicked to end the session. But the feeling didn't end. Across the world, people stayed standing long after the feed went dark. Exactly 1 month after that unforgettable video call, a quiet press release slipped onto the website of a mid-tier entertainment journal. No celebrity photo, no grand headline, just 6 words at the top of the statement. The Lighthouse Fund is now active. There were no interviews, no TV segments, no mention of Keanu Reeves in the body of the announcement. In fact, the only identifying detail was a mailing address, registered to a modest building in Pasadena, and a simple mission line: to honor the invisible heroes behind the scenes of storytelling. At first, most people missed it, but within days, word began to spread. Those who had been on the original call remembered. Their inboxes started buzzing. People whispered to one another on studio lots, in coffee shops, in long trailer lines. It didn't take a social media campaign to carry the message. It traveled the same way his voice had that day: genuine, quiet, unstoppable. The first checks arrived without warning. One showed up at a sound engineer's door in Queens. He'd recently suffered a heart attack and was facing a stack of unpaid bills. The envelope had no sender name, just a crisp sheet of paper that read, "We heard you. The Lighthouse is with you." Inside was a check covering his entire medical debt, plus a note handwritten in simple block letters: not charity, recognition. In Atlanta, a studio janitor named Elijah received a letter addressed directly to him. It arrived the same day his daughter was accepted to college. He'd been losing sleep, trying to figure out how to afford even the deposit. The letter read, "She's going. We've got it covered. Lighthouse Fund, Scholarship Division." Enclosed was the full tuition. He held the envelope in his hands for a long time. Then he folded it up, walked to the tiny break room where he usually ate alone, and cried while sitting on a plastic stool. In Vancouver, a woman named Janine, who had worked in costuming for 28 years, opened her front door to find 2 boxes waiting. One contained upgraded equipment she could never afford on her freelance salary. The other contained a letter saying, "We remember the time you worked a 16-hour shoot with a torn tendon just to save a reshoot. You mattered then. You still do." Each package, each letter, each gesture was carefully curated. Not random, not mass-printed. This wasn't about spreading good PR. It was about restoring dignity in places the spotlight never touched. No official tally was released, but by the second week, more than 400 industry workers across 6 countries had posted anonymously in forums and group chats. Most of them simply shared one line: "I thought I was invisible." Then a stranger gave me hope. The Lighthouse logo, a simple beam of light drawn in a soft charcoal style, started appearing on coffee mugs in set kitchens, on corkboards, on locker room stickers. It wasn't trendy, it wasn't branded for profit, it was whispered and passed along like something sacred. And always, there was no public statement from Keanu. He refused to speak about it even when asked directly by journalists. When one reporter caught him leaving a restaurant and asked, "Can you comment on the Lighthouse Fund?" he simply smiled, paused, and said, "Some lights don't need to announce themselves." In New Orleans, a production assistant named Miguel received a manila envelope at his apartment. He almost threw it away, thinking it was junk mail. But when he opened it, he found a certificate printed on thick ivory paper. It read, "You kept going. We saw you. This is for the night you stayed behind to sweep broken glass so no one else would slip." Attached was a prepaid rental lease covering the next 6 months of his housing. No name, no signature, just a logo stamped in the corner. The Lighthouse Beam. Miguel sat on his worn-out sofa and didn't move for over an hour. That one sentence, so oddly specific, brought back a memory he hadn't thought about in years. It had been a long shoot. Tensions were high. Everyone rushed out after wrap. Someone had dropped a prop mirror. He had stayed behind, broom in hand. No one had thanked him. Not until now. In a medical facility outside Burbank, a former set medic named Lena stared in disbelief at the letter in her lap. It acknowledged a day in 2003 when she administered emergency care to a lead actor who had collapsed on set. The letter said, "We know what you did. He never forgot." Enclosed was a card granting her full coverage for her current physical therapy treatments. For years she had been scraping by, putting off care for herself because others needed it more. But now, someone had decided that her pain was worth healing too. Across the country and beyond, more letters came. A gaffer in Prague, a boom operator in Cape Town, a line cook from a film lot in Toronto. None of them knew each other. None of them had ever been featured in an article. But each received something profoundly personal. Not just help, but acknowledgement. One day, a message thread popped up in a private online community for Hollywood crew workers. The subject line was, "The lighthouse saw me too." Dozens replied, then hundreds, each sharing their stories in whispers, in fragments. Some were just pictures of envelopes. Some posted quotes from the letters they'd received. And in the middle of it all, one user simply typed. He remembered. No one needed to ask who he was. Still, not a single verified source had published an article. Not a single celebrity tweet went viral. It didn't matter. In an industry that often forgot the people who made it function, something had shifted. 1 week after the first round of aid went out, a handwritten card was found pinned to the bulletin board inside a small indie studio's lunchroom. Taped above the microwave, surrounded by faded call sheets and old flyers, the card said, "You matter, even when no one says it." Especially then. People started bringing in their own stories, notes, tokens. Others left cash for coworkers, too proud to ask for help. Kindness rippled, not because of a campaign, but because someone had reminded them that their work, their dignity, their humanity was worthy of love. And so, without banners or speeches, without photos or fanfare, the Lighthouse Fund became something more than a charity. It became a quiet revolution, a reminder that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers. We see you. At a film lot in Pasadena, a janitor named Harold pushed his mop down a quiet hallway after a long night shift. He was 58, graying at the temples, and had worked in the industry for over 2 decades. Most people never noticed him. He didn't mind. He was proud to keep things clean. A week ago, an envelope had arrived at his apartment, addressed only to Harold. Inside was a letter that read, "Your son's dreams are real, so are yours." Enclosed was a scholarship certificate, 4 full years at the University of Southern California, prepaid in full. His son, Elijah, had just gotten accepted, but had already planned to defer. Harold hadn't told anyone how badly it hurt. Now, that dream was alive again. He held the certificate in his hands as if it were a sacred object. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry without hiding in the garage. In a modest home outside Albuquerque, Maria Vasquez sat beside her husband, David, a seasoned grip who had worked on dozens of productions over the years. He had injured his back on set, but had refused to stop working. They had no insurance. Then, one night, as Maria was preparing dinner, an envelope arrived via courier. She thought it was a bill. Instead, it contained an authorization letter for full spinal surgery coverage under a special fund. No application necessary. David stared at the letter, then at Maria. "I never asked for this," he whispered. "You didn't have to," she replied. "Someone saw what you gave." They hugged, their bodies shaking not just from relief, but from the simple, overwhelming feeling of being noticed, seen, cared for. Across the country, in a tiny New York apartment, an editor named Leigh sat on her couch in silence. She had just turned in her final cut for a streaming miniseries. For 3 years, she hadn't taken more than 4 days off in a row. She had migraines, anxiety. She'd started to wonder if the art she loved was costing her more than it gave. Then came the letter. "Take the break you never thought you could afford. We believe in your restoration." With it was a prepaid 6-month sabbatical fund. Enough to live on, enough to stop, enough to breathe. She stared at the wall, then stood. She walked to the kitchen, made tea, and turned off every device in the room. No screens, no deadlines, just silence, and the slow, unfamiliar feeling of healing. Each of these people had been vital to the magic of cinema. They had carried cameras, moved sandbags, cleaned dressing rooms, delivered meals. But Hollywood, in all its glitz, rarely paused to thank them by name. And now, through letters that never sought applause, someone had. In a group message thread between a few sound technicians, a quiet message appeared. Made us feel like humans, not parts of a machine. And no one needed to ask who he was. In a tucked-away trailer on the edge of a massive studio lot, an elderly woman named Brenda adjusted a small radio on her workbench. She had styled hair for half the industry but retired without ceremony. Most mornings now she tinkered with old wigs for community theater productions just to stay busy. That morning her mailbox held something strange. A package. No sender name. Inside was a velvet-lined case, and resting in it were a pair of antique silver shears engraved with the words, "For hands that shape characters, not just hair." Brenda clutched the shears to her chest. Alongside them was a note. "Thank you for helping me look like someone worth believing in." Her hands shook. She hadn't worked with Keanu Reeves since 2001. She didn't think he'd remember her, but apparently he had. And a modest coffee shop in Georgia. 23-year-old Malik, a former catering assistant, looked up from behind the counter as a regular customer walked in wearing a production hoodie. She looked around, smiled, and slipped him a thick envelope. "From someone who remembers the way you never let the coffee run out," she whispered. Inside was a check for $10,000, labeled simply, "Next Chapter." Malik enrolled in culinary school that same afternoon. The stories continued. A set medic in Vancouver who once bandaged Keanu's bleeding palm during an onset accident received a call from her daughter. "Mom," she said, "you won't believe this, but someone just paid off your mortgage." A former assistant director, who had quietly left the business after a family tragedy, opened his door one morning to find a potted sapling and a message. "You built stories. Here's one that grows." The return address? Lighthouse Fund. No media had covered these gifts. There were no headlines, no press conferences. Yet the ripple traveled far and wide. On film lots from Tokyo to Toronto, people started sharing their own versions of being seen. A lighting assistant in Berlin found a new set of professional gear delivered to his door with a handwritten message of encouragement. A janitor in Sydney was surprised with airfare to visit his sick brother in Fiji. A young props apprentice in Ohio received funding to finish a degree she had abandoned when her father passed away. There were no strings, no expectations, just quiet acts of remembrance. Each story echoed one thing. Someone finally remembered the forgotten, and that someone hadn't made it about himself. The Lighthouse Fund had no celebrity branding. It carried no ego, no expectation, just grace. In the corners of the industry most often walked past, people now stood a little taller. They spoke about their work with renewed pride, not because they were rich or famous, but because they knew they mattered. Keanu's words, spoken by accident, had sparked a movement more powerful than any scripted speech. A camera grip summed it up best during a wrap party, holding a beer in one hand and a letter in the other. "We didn't ask to be thanked. We just didn't want to be invisible." He got that. The crowd around him nodded, and for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel like shadows in the background. They felt like part of the story. The wind was soft that morning. It moved through the trees like a whisper, carrying with it the scent of wet grass and morning light. Keanu stood alone at the edge of a modest cemetery in the San Fernando Valley. No cameras, no entourage, just a folded piece of paper in his hand and a small pin tucked into his coat pocket. The grave in front of him bore a simple inscription: David Ybarra, 1952201 9. He built what others only dreamed. Keanu knelt quietly, resting one hand on the cool stone. His eyes lingered there, not just reading the name, but remembering the man behind it. David had been a set carpenter, one of the best, the kind of man who could turn plywood into cathedrals. He had worked on over a dozen of Keanu's films, always in the background, always early, always last to leave. David had never asked for anything, not a spotlight, not a thank you, but Keanu remembered every quiet nod, every time David had covered for someone's mistake without a word. Every time he showed up, even when he was sick or tired or grieving himself. Keanu unfolded the letter slowly. His fingers shook slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of what had gone unsaid for too long. He took a breath and began reading aloud, though there was no one to hear but the wind and the earth. I've been thinking about you more than ever lately, about how much you built for others, how little you asked for, how much you deserved that I never said out loud. He paused, swallowed hard. You taught me more about respect and grace than any actor or director ever did. You made people feel safe, like they belonged, like their work mattered, and you did it quietly. You were the first person on set and the last to leave. You missed weddings, birthdays, rest, and recognition. He looked up briefly, his eyes tracing the curve of the hill behind the cemetery, then back down. I never got to say thank you, not the real kind. I never got to tell you that I saw you, that I learned from you, that everything I'm trying to do now with the Lighthouse Fund, you were the reason. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and removed a small silver pin. It was shaped like a lighthouse, with a tiny beam of light engraved in gold. He placed it gently against the gravestone. Someone once said a lighthouse doesn't run around trying to save ships. It just stands there, shining. You were that. You still are. He sat there for a moment, letting the silence hold him. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't for anyone's eyes but David's. In a world obsessed with noise, this moment was made of stillness. Then, rising slowly, Keanu looked at the stone one last time. You weren't forgotten. You were the reason. Later that week, a quiet update was made to the Lighthouse Fund's website. A single new page appeared in the corner of the site, titled The First Light. No media outlets reported on it. There was no social campaign or press event. It was a tribute page to David Ybarra. There was a scanned image of one of his early carpentry blueprints, notes scribbled in the margins. Below that, a photo. David standing proudly in front of a half-built western town set, hands on his hips, sun in his eyes. Next to it, a quote Keanu had written by hand. This was the man who held it all up while we made shadows on screens. The page invited visitors to submit names of crew members who had touched their lives, those who, like David, had given more than they ever received. By the end of the day, hundreds of names had been submitted. The next morning, it was thousands. People shared stories of an assistant camera operator who helped them through a divorce, a costume intern who gave her lunch to a grip every day for weeks, a driver who showed up with cough drops and silence when a makeup artist lost her mother. The unsung, Keanu read every submission. Some made him smile, others brought tears, but all of them reinforced the truth he had spoken without knowing the world would hear. Every person matters. A few days later, a box arrived at the Ybarra household. David's widow, Elena, opened it carefully. Inside was a framed letter, the one Keanu had read at the grave. Below it, a certificate naming David the honorary first honoree of the Lighthouse Fund's Permanent Legacy Program. Enclosed was also a check. Enough to cover the mortgage she had struggled with for years, quietly, never asking for help. But there was something more powerful than money inside that box. There was acknowledgement, a whisper that said, "We see you now." In studios across the world, the effect of the mic glitch had not faded. People were still talking about it, not in headlines or hashtags, but in break rooms, carpools, and after-hour beers. Crew members were speaking up, not to demand, but to recognize one another. Directors were asking for more diverse input. Producers were checking on their team's mental health. Even studio executives were quietly moving budget lines to make room for wellness stipends and scholarships. It hadn't started with a campaign. It started with a mistake, a hot mic, a moment of truth that had landed not like scandal, but like grace. Months later, as the anniversary of the event approached, Keanu refused requests to turn it into a public ceremony. "If you make it about me," he said, "you miss the point." Instead, he encouraged the Lighthouse Fund team to spend the day doing what it was built for: sending hospital bills, expanding training grants, real work, quiet work. And in a closing note written at the bottom of the tribute page, Keanu left one final sentence: "Shine anyway, even if no one's watching." Now, to every viewer watching this story, have you ever wished someone knew how much you gave? Share your story in the comments. You deserve to be seen. And tell us, what story would you like us to share next with Keanu Reeves? We'll be reading every single one.